Hi, I am Barbara Dillon, Editor-in-Chief of Fanbase Press. In light of the 2023 Writers Guild of America and SAG-AFTRA strikes, we here at Fanbase Press not only want to show our solidarity with the striking workers, but we also seek to help educate and inform our community members about why the strikes are happening, their potential impact, and how you can get involved. With me today is Julie Rei Goldstein, who is a voiceover actor who most recently has provided voices in The Legend of Vox Machina Season 2. Her previous experience includes voice work in television, anime, and video games, as well as live action appearances. Julie, thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thank you for discussing these issues right now because it's tough to get the word out.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Absolutely. And thank you for joining us for this conversation. Julie, you have a wealth of experience as an actor in various entertainment media. What can you tell us about when you first became a member of SAG-AFTRA and why it was important for you to join the union?
I became a member, I want to say it was around 2009, 2010, but the stark contrast from when I went union to working non-union is like night and day. Suddenly on camera stuff, there were specific minimum times or maximum times that you were allowed to be waiting in an audition room because before the pandemic, a lot of us went in person. Nowadays, there are other issues as well, which is part of the strike as well. Um, but the main important things are minimums, knowing that you're going to get a base contract minimum, not just in pay, but in time. When we talk about voiceover work, that's a big one. But then also our health and benefits that for people who don't, all they do is performing, they need to have health and benefits through the union. And considering the high bar for it at the moment, it just makes the point even more for why people need to get those minimums every year.
Absolutely. And you've touched on this, Julie, already, but I just want to expound upon it a little bit further in terms of the benefits that being a union member affords you. What are the benefits that you feel have helped you in your career as being part of the union versus, like you were just mentioning, the health, the wellness benefits that really afford you the ability to, take care of yourself and your well-being?
I think one of the things that people don't really touch on as much is that the union contracts do control so much of the performance process, not just how much you get paid, but they also control the audition requirements. So back before the pandemic, when we were going into rooms to audition for casting directors, I remember non-union work where I would be sitting in that room for 4 to 5 hours before being seen. And it was ridiculous because, especially as someone who was also having to do a day job, it became really hard balancing schedules. When you are auditioning for a union project, there are very specific maximums that you can be held beyond your call time for. And if you go beyond that, then they actually have to start paying you, which is a great reason for them not to keep you that long. But then in voiceover work, there's also minimums on how long a session needs to be minimum. That used to affect me incredibly when I worked non-union. I remember I worked one job where they brought me in for literally 15 minutes and they paid me for 15 minutes and it wasn't even that great a rate.
Oh,
I
goodness.
probably yeah, I probably spent more on the gas to get to that gig than the project paid. But in union work, you have a minimum of 2 hours and at a specific rate. So, for example, I did a dubbing job a couple months ago where I had to go back for some pickups, and the pickup was literally one line, one word, and because of the union, I was afforded my minimum 2 hour payment for that day. And that really helps, especially if a lot of performers are not these, a lot of people think about that everybody in SAG-AFTRA are these big Hollywood stars, and it's not. It's people that are making very close to what you'd consider to be minimum wage. So a lot of us do have to hold down other secondary jobs. And so it's very hard to really have that time control. And if I'm going to take off, my day job to go to voiceover work or an on-camera work, I need to know that it's really going to be worth my time, not just my time of being there and my performance, but also my time of being off the other work that I'm doing that is actually putting a roof over my head.
And Julie, it may be challenging for some of our viewers to understand why both the WGA and the SAG-AFTRA strikes are happening. When you're outside of the industry, you're not privy to, the inner workings. It can be confusing. Why do you feel, or how do you feel that we got here where we are today?
The main problem is really all revolves around technology. The last time that we had a strike of this magnitude, it was really it really revolved around the move from the theater experience to home video. And because there was not that type of residual incentive or placement in the contracts, the studios were able to put things on home video and not actually pay the actors for the money that they were making on stuff that they'd already been paid. And that's how we got to the current contract that takes care of home video, of television release, and provides those residuals for people both in the WGA and SAG-AFTRA. But the problem is when streaming came about, it was very new. People didn't know that it was able to be monetized. And then it started with, a couple things on certain providers, Netflix, that I can mention. I can't mention specifics. Um, and they just weren't compensating people the same way that they would if this were a broadcast program. And it isn't just that um, they weren't compensating them even according. So the same amount of viewers, they could have the same amount of viewership in streaming as in television or an amount of home video sold. And the performers and the writers are not making anything off of the back end. I know for myself, the one project that I've probably seen one residual check for is a project that I did for streaming. Everything else, I've gotten consistent residuals for my work year over year. And especially in the work of a performer where your job really is auditioning, it's very small amount of your time is actually performing. There's a lot of time that you're not being paid for what you're doing. So you need those residuals to get you through, those 100 auditions that you're going to have to do before you get the next gig. People think that, we're working 40 hours a week. That would be great if we were, but unless you're a recurring or a lead on a major show, uh, that's not happening. And there are a lot of problems that have happened with streaming, not just the fact that we're not being told, the streamers are being very secretive about the viewership numbers, which is affecting the residuals, but also with streaming, they're really cutting down on the episode numbers. And that's been a huge issue with the WGA because to get in a room, you really need to know that you have a specific amount of episodes and that you're not just being contracted for, one episode or two episodes and it's, next month you're going to be out of a job. It's it's a terrible circumstance. So it really is all about technology. There's another main issue that has occurred with the SAG-AFTRA strike, and it actually revolves around the subject of the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, we moved to completely instead of in-person auditions to what are called self-tapes. So in my home, I would have to put together a place to, do my audition, and the studios would require the exact same quality as going into a casting director's office. And it puts a lot more of the onus on the performer to not just be a performer, but also uh, be an
You're
expert
a
in
videographer.
technology.
Yes.
Yeah, be a videographer, be a lighting expert. And for a lot of us, thankfully, we've found a community, and there's been a really great community of little studios that have picked up doing self tapes, but it still costs money to do that. So even if I'm going in to do a self tape at, my local, my personal favorite is a little business called the Actors Collective here in Burbank. Uh, even if I don't book that, I'm spending the money to do the self tape apart from the time. And that's something that is not currently being taken into account. We're being asked to do these self-tapes sometimes with 24 hours notice and memorize 6 to 7 pages worth of dialogue. Um, and we're being expected not just to do the performance, but put all these items together or pay out of our pockets to have somebody else do them. So that's another big issue. Another big issue about technology is the issue of AI and where that's taking us. Currently, for SAG, one of the big issues is how studios have been able to use the image of performers for segments or projects that they didn't actually shoot in person, especially now that there's a lot of AI being used for certain major studios and major franchises and projects that people whose likenesses are getting used, they're not receiving money for it. And that's a major issue, especially that came up with SAG-AFTRA with background workers, because background workers are some of the hardest working people in SAG-AFTRA. They have to be on set sometimes for 12, 16-hour days. It's continual work. They're not sitting around. They're actually moving almost the entire time. And to be a working background actor, because I did some background a couple years ago, and it was not only was it extremely strenuous to once you were on set, but the booking process was almost as strenuous as the regular audition process for a recurring or a principal role. And what the studios have suggested is that background performers can be work one day and then their likeness is taken and they can be used in AI in perpetuity. And that's going to put a lot of people out of work and some of the hardest working people in SAG-AFTRA. And my heart and everything goes out to them specifically, because I think they're being hurt the most in the union personally.
Absolutely. And those are such solid points, Julie, and thank you for articulating them, because like I said, it can be really challenging to know all these ins and outs of behind the scenes, and especially with that last point, what would happen if one of those people who in perpetuity had their image or likeness utilized without being paid, and then they went on to be a star? What happens to them, and what happens to their payment?
And we're
Yeah.
seeing that also in voiceover quite a lot. You're going to see a lot of voiceover artists talking about how some contracts are allowing studios to use they're requesting to use their performance to create new performances via AI and not actually compensate them for it. That's ridiculous. You pay us to perform. If you want to use my voice in a project, bring us in. It's not that we don't want to work, it's that they're trying to make a lot more money off of us than we're getting rightfully.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of the actions that striking workers can do, there are lots of do's and don'ts that apply to the striking workers while the strike is on. Can you explain why these prescriptions are important?
The main reason is we can't promote any struck work. I can't talk about projects that I've done, even if they were recorded years ago, if they're under a contract that is struck. The reason why that's important is because we, as performers, especially in the fandom world, are basically walking billboards for projects. You and that's something we love to do: go to conventions, talk to people about their love for these projects as well. Um, and it's just as hard for us actually as the fandom, but it's really important because it really shows a solid front for us that we're not going to do free work for you unless you actually start compensating us for the work that not only you aren't paying us for, but that we're also doing just out of our own love.
Absolutely. Now, on the flip side of that, for us as consumers, should we be boycotting these companies to demonstrate our solidarity? What are your thoughts on that?
Neither SAG-AFTRA nor the WGA are asking for a consumer boycott at this point. I would say definitely still watch the shows that you love, go see the movies that you love, because to be honest, the more the studios realize the amount that they're leaving on the table by letting the strike go on as long as they are, the more incentive it is for them to come back to the table and start negotiating in earnest again. Because I personally, having seen some of the pushback from the AMTP, I have not I've not seen that they've come to the table in earnest. Unfortunately, a lot of their pushback has been very unreasonable, and it's just in no way in any workable shape at the moment. So we're not asking for a boycott. Enjoy them. Show these studios what the work of the writers and the actors means to you. If you review movies and TV shows, continue to do that. This strike, we're not requesting that broadcasters or, reviewers or publication strike. You're not striking with us. You're in solidarity with us, but you don't have to strike with us. We're not asking for that at all. But also for the fans, respect that if you see us at a convention or in public, respect that we can't talk about struck projects. We'd love to tell you how much we love the art of performing, how much we love seeing you guys doing what we do. But unfortunately, we're not trying to be mean when you ask us about, a show that we did 5 years ago and we say, well, we can't talk about it. We're not trying to be mean. It's just, we can't talk about struck work. That's part of being on strike.
That makes complete sense. Are there any specific ways that you would ask viewers to demonstrate their solidarity, or that you would recommend that folks can show their solidarity?
One of the main source that I tell people to go to is SAG-AFTRAstrike.org. That is the official website for the SAG-AFTRA strike and includes all different rules and regulations on what the strike encompasses and what projects are being struck. Because the other thing that people don't understand is what projects are currently struck. For example, I do a lot of my work under the dubbing contract, which is not currently struck. So I'm still able to work on dubbing work and talk about dubbing work. But there are other contracts and other projects that I can't. So if you're curious what is considered struck work, you can always go to that website. They'll also give indications for both influencers and if you are a reviewer. We're not asking the public to, if you're not a member of SAG-AFTRA and you don't plan on being a member of SAG-AFTRA or the WGA, definitely show your support. You can do things like cosplaying, all those things. But if you're planning to be a member of SAG-AFTRA or the WGA, then maybe think a little more and look at the regulations if you're going to do something while the strike is happening, because you don't want that to affect your future opportunities. We want more people to come into the unions, and the reason we're doing this is to not just for us now, but to make things better for people that are coming down the road, because you're going to benefit too from the contract that we're going to come out of this strike with.
Well, Julie, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful experiences, your expertise with all of our viewers. We appreciate it immensely. Our solidarity is with you 100%. And we just, honestly, it's just lovely to chat with you all the time. So thank you for your time today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure for me as well. You have to do it more often.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Julie.